All right, so it's time to try writing our own generic function. Well, not try, we're going to do it. I'm going to show you the syntax. It's actually not bad at all. I've talked it up. I said I didn't like the syntax for generics. I just don't like the angle brackets everywhere. But we're going to use those. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So the classic simple example for a generic is a function called identity, which I think is terrible, but it's at least a simple example. It's the one on the doc, so we'll start there. The idea of the identity function is that it accepts some argument and it returns that argument. That's literally it. So let's call this, item as our parameter. And let's start with numbers. So it accepts some number, and then all that it does is it returns item. So what type does that mean its return type is? That means it returns number, right? So we could call this maybe number identity if I also wanted to have a string identity. Again, this is the least useful function on earth. It takes in some item and it returns that item. But when it comes to type annotations, we want to say this one is a string, right? And therefore it will return a string if it's returning that element. So whatever type of element you pass to me, I'm going to return something of that type. I'm literally returning the same thing. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? I could also have a Boolean identity function that accepts a Boolean, and then that means it's going to return a Boolean, and so on. And I could keep going with this, and there's a lot of things that suck about this. One is that I'm creating a separate function with a different name every time, but also I'm limited to whatever types I've written one for. So I don't have one right now for an array of strings or an object identity or a cat identity if I had a cat interface or a cat type alias. So not a great solution if I really wanted to have this ability for every possible type. So what I could do instead is just write a function that's generalized and works with any type, right? Function identity will accept an item of type any. And then what's it going to return? It will return something of type any, and then I can return item. But this is not good. This defeats the whole point of TypeScript. I'm saying that this function accepts something of any type and then returns something of any type. But that could mean, from TypeScript's perspective, that it actually accepts a string and then returns a number. It doesn't mean whatever type you pass to it, it has to return. That's the relationship we have up here. Number as an input, you return a type number. If you have a string as an input, you return type string. Here, TypeScript views this as you give me anything and I don't care. You could return anything else, any type. There's not a relationship between the input and the output types. So that's not great. And we also want to try and avoid any when we can. So this is where a generic function could come in handy. We can write a generic function called identity. And what we do is we add angle brackets in here and then come up with some name like type, or usually actually what you'll see is T, but let's start with type. And then we have our parameter list, we have item, and then we can say it will be of type. Like I said, confusing, ugly syntax. And then we can say it returns type, and we'll return our item. Okay, so this is a generic function called identity, and you can provide it a type. So I could do something like this, identity of string. And this is exactly what we saw earlier, right, with query selector or array. You provide a type in those angle brackets. So if I call my identity function of type string, and then I provided a string, or even if I don't, I just do this right here, it already knows, TypeScript knows, okay, it's going to return a string. You provided a string argument there to the generic. That means that item must be of type string and the return type must be string. And if I change this to Boolean, TypeScript now says, okay, this version of identity is typed so that it has to have a Boolean argument, and we know that it returns a Boolean. So very different from this here, which just says, give me anything, I'll give you anything back. We've established a relationship here that says whatever the input type is, that will be the return type. So now I could use this, right, to do something like identity, let's do a number, and then I pass in a number like 7. And then that will return to me, it just returns 7, it returns a number. So the identity function sucks. It's stupid, but it's a simple example. It's a generic 101. So now if I say identity where I provide you a string type, I'm going to get an error if I provide the number 7, but if I provide a string, we're all good. And TypeScript knows we're going to get a string back. And if I had some interface, right, interface cat, and a cat has a name that's a string and a breed that's a string, if I provide to identity in those square brackets cat as my type, and TypeScript knows that the return value is going to be of type cat. Okay, so this simple function, all it does is it establishes a function that returns whatever you provide to it. The important thing here is that I can customize this identity function to work with different types. It's a generic version that just says some type, right? And then we use that within the function parameter list and the return type annotation of the function. Whatever this type is, we are going to have a parameter of that type and then return something of that type. So you can kind of think of it as like anytime you see capital T type, that's our parameter or our generic parameter name, you can replace all. If you provide a string, this is what identity looks like. If we provide Boolean, this is what it looks like. If we provide cat, this is what it looks like. But we're not writing those separate functions. We're writing just generic type. And then the last thing I should mention is that most of the time you'll actually see an uppercase T, which I think is a very unfriendly syntax. I guess either way, it's not great, but this is what you'll see all the time. And this is just a name. You could call it whatever you want, my type or generic type. As long as you're referencing that, that's all that matters. But people are lazy and want concise code, so we use the letter T, conventionally uppercase T. Okay, so again, this identity function now that I'm calling is expecting a cat, and it's also expecting a return type of cat. All right, we'll try another generic function that's a little bit better in the next video.